The soft hum of conversation and clinking glasses filled the air as Daniel Carter stepped into the grand ballroom of the Kensington Hotel. Chandeliers bathed the room in warm golden light, reflecting off the sleek marble floors. The year-end party for Carter and Green Marketing was in full swing, and his employees were already lost in the revelry. Yet, despite the celebratory atmosphere, Daniel felt a nagging unease claw at the edges of his thoughts. He adjusted the cuffs of his tailored navy suit, forcing a smile as he nodded at passing colleagues. Success had never been a stranger to him. His company thrived, his reputation gleamed, and at home, he had Sophia, the woman who had stood beside him through it all. Yet tonight, an unfamiliar restlessness simmered beneath his carefully composed exterior. "Daniel, you finally made it," a familiar voice called. He turned to see Michael Green, his longtime business partner and closest confidant, offering him a firm handshake. Michael was broad-shouldered, graying at the temples but sharp-eyed as ever. "Was beginning to think you'd ditch your own party." "Wouldn't dream of it," Daniel said smoothly. Michael gave him a knowing look. "You need to loosen up. Have a drink, let the night take its course." Daniel accepted the tumbler of whiskey Michael handed him, but his gaze drifted elsewhere, to Emily Hart. She stood near the bar, her silhouette framed against the glimmering bottles of imported liquor. The crimson of her dress clung to her in a way that commanded attention, though she seemed utterly unaware of it. Her laughter, light and effortless, reached him over the music. He told himself he was only looking because she was one of his most promising employees, sharp-witted, ambitious, a rising star in the company. Yet, when her gaze met his, there was something unspoken in the way she held it. A slow, deliberate recognition. He looked away. "She's been watching you," Michael muttered, following Daniel's line of sight. "Don't start," Daniel warned, sipping his drink. Michael smirked but said nothing more. As the night deepened, Daniel found himself gravitating toward the bar. It was a mistake, perhaps, but some invisible thread pulled him closer. "Mr. Carter," Emily greeted, her voice smooth as silk. "Enjoying the party?" "Trying to," he admitted. "Though I'd rather be home with my wife." Her lips curled into a half-smile. "And yet, here you are." There was no accusation in her tone, only quiet amusement. Daniel exhaled, feeling something shift between them. "I suppose some nights demand celebration," he said, deflecting. Emily tilted her head, studying him. "And some nights demand something more." The weight of her words lingered, yet before he could respond, someone called her name, drawing her attention away. She excused herself, leaving Daniel standing there, pulse uneven. Just then, his phone vibrated in his pocket. He pulled it out to find a text from Sophia. "Hope you're having fun. Can't wait to see you later." He swallowed hard, guilt tightening around his ribs. This was nothing. Harmless. A fleeting moment in the haze of a party. And yet, as Emily glanced back at him from across the room, her eyes dark with unspoken intent, Daniel realized that some lines, once blurred, became dangerously easy to cross. The whiskey burned as Daniel took another slow sip, but it did nothing to dull the unease settling in his chest. The laughter, the music, the clinking glasses, all of it blurred into background noise as he stood near the balcony doors, the cool night air seeping through the glass. He needed space, if only for a moment. He slipped outside, exhaling sharply as the crisp winter air bit at his skin. London stretched before him in a tapestry of lights, the city alive and breathing beneath the vast midnight sky. He should have felt grounded, but the moment Emily stepped onto the balcony, the ground beneath him felt anything but steady. "You disappeared," she said, her voice carrying a softness that made it impossible to ignore. "Needed some air," Daniel replied, keeping his tone even. Emily stepped closer, resting her elbows on the iron railing, her eyes scanning the skyline. "Funny. You don't strike me as the type to hide." Daniel tensed. "I'm not hiding." She turned her head, meeting his gaze with an unreadable expression. "Then what are you doing?" The question lingered between them, weighty and dangerous. He should have left. He should have said something dismissive, ended this conversation before it went any further. Instead, he let the silence stretch. Emily sighed, shaking her head. You don't have to pretend with me, Daniel. His jaw tightened. Pretend what? That you don't feel it. The words landed like a strike to the ribs. Unexpected and too precise. Daniel turned fully to face her, his pulse hammering in his ears. Emily, this is nothing, she finished for him, a knowing smile tugging at her lips. Or is that just what you tell yourself? A sharp gust of wind rustled through the city, but it wasn't the cold that made Daniel's breath hitch. He searched for the right response, the rational, measured words that would reinforce the boundaries between them. But Emily's confidence, the way she stood so unwavering, made it impossible to pretend those boundaries hadn't already begun to erode. She shifted closer, the scent of jasmine and something undeniably intoxicating curling in the space between them. Tell me to walk away, she whispered. Daniel opened his mouth, but the words tangled in his throat. The door behind them creaked open. Daniel! Michael's voice shattered the moment like a stone through glass. Daniel jerked back, tension stiffening his spine as he turned. His business partner stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable, but the weight of his gaze said enough. Emily, unfazed, offered Michael a polite smile before brushing past him and disappearing back inside. Michael didn't speak right away. He stepped onto the balcony, closing the door behind him. Tell me that was nothing, he said, his voice quiet but firm. Daniel exhaled, rubbing his temples. It was nothing. Michael's jaw tightened. No, it wasn't. I didn't do anything, Daniel shot back, but even to his own ears, it sounded like a weak defense. Michael studied him for a long moment before shaking his head. Do you know what you're risking? Daniel let out a humorless chuckle. You think I don't? Then why are you still standing here? That question cut deeper than it should have. Daniel had no answer. Michael sighed. Go home, Daniel. Before you make a mistake you can't take back. For a moment Daniel considered it. He imagined walking away, getting into his car, and returning home to Sophia, the woman who had given him everything. But then, through the glass doors, his eyes found Emily again. She was laughing, her head tilted back, the glow of the chandelier catching in her hair. And just like that, reason became a distant thing. The music pulsed like a slow heartbeat, reverberating through the grand ballroom. Daniel stood near the bar, his drink untouched, his thoughts tangled in a mess of guilt and temptation. The rational part of him screamed to leave, to heed Michael's warning, to go home to Sophia. But the other part, the one ruled by impulse, kept him anchored in place, watching Emily move effortlessly through the crowd. She was magnetic. The way she carried herself, the way her laughter seemed to pull people in. It was a gravity Daniel felt himself succumbing to. And when she glanced back at him, eyes dark with something unspoken, he knew that leaving was no longer a choice he was willing to make. Still brooding. Her voice was laced with amusement as she appeared beside him, her fingers grazing the rim of an untouched champagne flute. Daniel exhaled. I should go. But you won't, Emily murmured, tilting her head as she studied him. You wouldn't still be here if you wanted to leave. She was right, and they both knew it. Emily reached for his tie, smoothing the silk between her fingers before letting it slip away. It was the kind of touch that could be dismissed as nothing. Fleeting gesture. But Daniel felt the heat of it long after she pulled back. Come dance with me, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He hesitated. Emily. One dance, Daniel, she interrupted, holding out her hand. What harm could it do? He knew exactly what harm it could do. He also knew he was past the point of reason. Without another word he took her hand. The moment he pulled her onto the dance floor, the world outside of them ceased to exist. The music slowed, the hum of conversation dimmed, and all that remained was the intoxicating warmth of Emily pressed against him. Her hand rested lightly on his shoulder, her other laced with his. Every movement was deliberate, every shift of her body, every lingering glance. You feel it, don't you? She whispered, her breath warm against his skin. Daniel swallowed hard, his grip on her waist tightening. He did feel it. Pull. The inevitability of it was wrong. And yet, he couldn't bring himself to let go. Then, without warning, Emily lifted her chin, her lips dangerously close to his. A fraction of a second passed, one where Daniel could have stepped away, could have stopped this before it crossed the final line. He didn't. Their lips met. The contact was brief, a whisper of a kiss rather than a declaration. But it was enough. Enough to send a shiver through Daniel's spine. Enough to seal the betrayal he could never take back. And then, a sharp intake of breath. Daniel pulled back instantly, his heart slamming against his ribs as he turned toward the sound. Standing near the entrance of the ballroom, eyes wide, mouth slightly parted in shock, was Liam. An employee. A witness. Daniel's stomach dropped. Liam didn't say a word. He simply turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Panic seized Daniel's chest. His pulse roared in his ears. This wasn't just a mistake anymore. It was a catastrophe waiting to unfold. Emily touched his arm. Daniel, it's fine. But it wasn't. It was far from fine. His gaze snapped back to the ballroom entrance, half expecting Liam to return, to confront him, to confirm what had just happened. But the young man was gone. And for the first time that night, Daniel felt the full weight of what he had done.